Hey everybody, in this video I'm going to walk you through one formula you need to assess your mental health and to live depression and anxiety free indefinitely. My name is Ty Hicks. I'm a mental health coach. I used to be suicidal. I was medicated, hospitalized, put in therapy. None of those things really worked well for me, but I had to figure out my own way to live anxiety and depression free. I make these videos because I want you to also be able to have incredible mental health long term, because you deserve to, and you can if you're willing to apply the right strategies. So today I'm going to walk you through something that I found to be really, really powerful. It started, you know how sometimes you get like a seedling of an idea and then, it becomes really powerful and defining later on. So there was something I learned a long time ago. I had heard this little tidbit from Tony Robbins years ago where he said that there's a formula for happiness. And it sounded really kitschy, right? And the formula that he described, it did make sense to me in a basic form. And I thought, oh, okay, well, that's useful. And as I started working with more and more people, and as I was looking at my own mental health, I realized, yeah, this formula really does make sense. And I realized that it could be adapted or molded to better explain depression and anxiety in a really powerful way. So when he originally described it, he called it the formula for happiness, right? And his formula for happiness was, he said, it's when your life conditions equal or match your blueprint, right? And what he's essentially saying there is that when your life conditions match your expectations of your life, then you'll be happy, right? And so if you think of an area of your life that you are generally happy with, or you're pleased with, let's say, maybe you're like, oh, I'm not happy about anything. But if there's something in your life you're generally pleased with, then if I were to ask you, well, why are you happy about that particular area of your life? Like maybe it's your health or your relationship or your finances or whatever. It would probably be because that area of your life is generally matching up with the expectations you have about that area of your life. So, the example that comes to mind is, I'll use one for myself. So before, I used to be really, really hung up on certain things about like accomplishment and success and all of this stuff. And it really stressed me out. And I had certain expectations about, how big of a social media following I needed to have, and, how quickly my clients needed to turn their lives around. And I had all of these different things, and I had so many expectations, and it was tough for my work to match those expectations. So I felt stressed out and upset in my work a lot of the time. And that was really informative for me to realize I needed to modify some of those expectations to match my current circumstances, only so I could then stop feeling totally upset and stressed out. And then I would feel more fuel to actually go after the goals that I have. So if you look at an area of your life that you're really displeased with, which for most people, it's easier for them to find something like that. Think about something in your life that you're displeased with. Well, chances are it's because that particular thing is something that does not match up with your expectations, right? Like if you're upset in your relationship right now, it's because your partner is maybe not doing things that you expect them to do, or vice versa. They're doing things you expect them to not do, okay? If you're feeling upset or stressed with your children or with a friend of yours, right? It would be because they're not doing what you expect them to do. So what I have learned is that, Tony Robbins called it happiness, right? But what I've actually learned is that anxiety is just the absence of internal peace, right? What everyone's really craving in the world, people usually say happiness, right? That's the most common thing when I ask them, like, what do you want to feel? They go, oh, happy. And I say, well, what does that mean? Right? And it always comes back to what really people want is they want to feel content. They want to feel peace. They want to feel the absence of distress, right? Equilibrium, right? Whatever you want to call it. And to make that happen, what that really requires is the equation being balanced. It requires your life circumstances matching your expectations. That's what's going to be somebody who's really fulfilled. In fact, someone who's really ecstatic and really over the moon is going to be when your life circumstances are even better than your expectations, right? So how do you use this, right? And how do you really use this to actually start improving your anxiety level? Well, here's kind of my adaptation of this concept. And I found this to be very empowering for people. So imagine that you and I are going to play a board game. So I come to you and I say, hey, let's play this board game. It's brand new. Let's try it out. And you say, okay, sure. So as we're playing the board game, you're trying to score points and you're trying to win. But as you try to score points, right, as you keep like rolling the dice and moving your person around and doing what you need to do, it seems like no matter what you do, you can't win. You can't score the points. Every time you try to score a point, there's a rule that I tell you about that's in violation. And so you can't score the point. And not only can you seem to never figure out how to score a point, but you also are losing points left and right. Like you're violating rules and you lose a point here, you lose a point there, and all of a sudden you can't figure out how to win. Well, you would probably get pretty frustrated, right? And if I then invited you to play again and you had the same outcome, and then I invited you to play again, right, after maybe the third time, if not sooner than that, you're going to not want to play ever again. Because what are you going to conclude? You're going to conclude, I cannot win at this game. Why in the world would I try? And you're going to want to go and do something else. Well, this is how most people are living their life, to some degree. And people who are feeling really depressed or really anxious are really living this experience where they're trying to play a game that they feel like they can't win. And you probably can empathize with that, but here's the thing that most people don't realize. We are the writers of our own rules of the game that we are all trying to play. In other words, you're trying to win the game of life, but you wrote the rules for that game of life. Now, you probably did it unconsciously. You didn't know that you were doing it, but you wrote those rules. So, for example, one thing when I coach people through grief, I had a woman a couple of years ago and she was very distressed about having lost her mother. Now, her mother was, I think, in her 70s, had had a health problem for a long time or something like that. And her mother had been dead for, 3 or 4 years, but she was really still distraught about it and upset. And what I came to realize was it wasn't that her mother had passed that was upsetting her. It was that she had a series of beliefs about how she thought her mother should not have died, right? She had this whole story about how my mother was taken from me too early and it wasn't fair and it wasn't justified and all of that stuff, right? So her expectations did not match her life conditions. And so I asked her a series of questions, including, well, how would your mother feel about the torment that you're putting yourself through, right? Like, what would your mother say? And, she realized that for her to be at peace would be what her mother would wish, right? So she had to realize that she had to just accept that I can't control this. It happened. Who knows why it happened? And for her, she was a woman of faith, so she had to kind of equate that with God or, whatever. But anyway, you get the point, right? You have to change your expectations sometimes, especially when you cannot control your life circumstances. So if we're playing this board game and you've written the rules where the only way you win is if this one thing in the game goes a particular way, but that one thing is totally outside of your control and it was already determined in the past, right? Well, you're going to feel like you're losing literally from the very beginning. As soon as you wake up in the morning, you're going to feel like you're losing. And some people are like that. I had a client also where he had a belief of I should be 6 inches taller than I am. Well, if that's your rule, if you really are only going to allow yourself to feel fulfilled once that rule is met, you're going to feel like you're losing the game of life as soon as you open your eyes in the morning. And this is why so many people who are feeling depressed don't get out of bed, right? Because in their head, they're just going through all the expectations that have been unmet. They feel like the game of life is so losable. They feel that even if they were going to go and work, they would lose. Even if they go and do this, they're going to lose. Even if they go and do that, they're going to lose. So what do? They numb themselves. They stay in bed. They watch TV. They consume substances, something to take their mind off of the endless stream of expectations. Why do you think so many people go to drugs or alcohol? Because when you go to drugs or alcohol, you, quote, get out of your head temporarily, right? Depending on the drug, but you'll shut down that part of your brain that's going through all of the rules, going through all of the expectations. So you temporarily forget that you have those rules and expectations and numb yourself. and it's okay for a little while, right? And then typically you get sober and then you're like, damn, why did I do that? I shouldn't have done that. So you violated another rule. So what I have found is that people who have a couple rules that are constantly getting violated will be somewhat anxious or somewhat sad. People who have a huge amount of rules that are getting violated will be very anxious or depressed. And people who have a set of rules where they feel like the game is absolutely unwinnable, it'll be unwinnable in the future, it's unwinnable now, doesn't matter what they do, it's unwinnable, that's what creates suicidal tendencies, right? Like when people have a set of expectations like, well, my father should have never talked to me that way, and my mother shouldn't have let him talk to me that way, or, those are the common ones. When we've got an expectation that it's about something we can't control, it's inevitably going to be violated, well, now you're going to lose. But here's the good news. You can update the rules of your game, which is really cool. So here are a couple things that always make us feel like the game is, these are the things that unbalance the equation. The first thing that'll make you miserable is if you have too many rules, like just too many. One client I had recently, she was so anxious, she could barely leave her apartment. I mean, it was so bad. Like she was nearly making herself faint because she was getting so lightheaded and things. And so I went through this exercise that I do, we call it the values process, and I helped her find all of her rules, and she had 9 pages of rules. Would you want to play a board game where you had to follow 9 pages of rules? Right? I don't think so. That would seem pretty damn impossible. And she had rules like, I can't ever feel slightly, I can't feel tired, right? Like she had rules that not only did she have too many rules, which is the first way you can make the game feel tough. The second way you can do it is have rules that are inevitably going to be violated. She had a ton of rules that would inevitably be violated. Rules around the weather, rules around how she felt, rules around how other people treated her, rules around the past, okay, things like that. The third way is to have rules that are outside of your control, that revolve around other people. And this will be a big determining factor as to how stressed out you get in relationships. Because if you have too many rules on other people, it's like you're playing the board game, you have to win, but the only way you win is if everybody else does what they're supposed to do, and it doesn't really matter what you do. Well, that's going to be a recipe for a lot of frustration, and you're going to start yelling at those other players, right? Trying to get them to conform to the rules. So very often in life, what we're doing is we're going through life trying to get people to abide by what we think are the rules, but they're not the rules. They're just our rules, okay? And that's a big problem. So having too many rules that will be inevitably violated, rules that are outside of your control. And then the final one would be rules that are in conflict. So for example, sometimes people are trying to win the game of life because they want to feel acceptance, for example. So they keep trying to people please, right? And they want to people please, but at the same time, they really want to be successful and they want to be a business owner. And it's like, okay, great. Well, those two things don't go those two don't go together. And by the way, I'm speaking from experience because this is what, when I started my business, I had all these issues initially of approval. And I'm like, oh, what are people going to think, right? It's like, well, when you're worried about what other people are going to think, you can't really go and try to, build a business on your own. So sometimes we feel like we're tugged in multiple directions, which is a way to feel like you're losing. Like every time you score a point, you lose a point, right? So if you want to live an anxiety-free life, it is possible. It is possible to do that. I should say anxiety with a capital A, free life. That is possible, where you're not constantly, incessantly worried and all that stuff, right? Well, we're all going to have moments of worry from time to time. But you can do that. And the way that you do that is you resolve the equation. You make sure that the expectations or the rules balance and they match with your life circumstances. You make it so that the rules are not in conflict. There's not too many rules. You don't have rules that are going to get violated inevitably, right, by the laws of nature or just how life is. And you instead have a small set of rules, a set of rules that you are predominantly in control of, and a set of rules that makes it easy for you to win, okay? And that takes a little time to figure out how to do, but it is definitely possible. And you can rewrite the rules whenever you want. And a simple way you can start is just by figuring out, well, what expectations have I been holding on to that are just really outdated, right? Very often we're holding on to rules that like our parents gave us or our peers gave us, or we picked up from some TV show somewhere and we thought, oh, I'm only going to be, worthwhile if I do this and I make this amount of money and all that, right? Like sometimes we're playing a game based off of a set of rules, like we just adopted someone else's rules. And we're trying to live our own life with our own purpose, with our own sense of meaning. Meanwhile, we're also trying to follow someone else's rules. Like of course you're going to be miserable. You got to write your own rules, right? You got to figure out what game of life you want to play and what those rules are going to be. And if what you really want out of the game of life is to feel happiness and peace, well, you're certainly not going to get that by having a shit ton of rules, right? So you got to start getting rid of those. So I hope this has been helpful. I really look forward to comments on this one. Please engage with this because it helps somebody who's in need see this material. And we're very appreciative of that. But I hope this really helps you. And remember that you can absolutely do this. You just got to start from where you're at and keep moving forward. So I'll see you in the next one. See ya.